Good morning. How you doing, saints? Welcome back, man. There's a lot of you back, a lot of students, and it's great to have you here. The fall is always one of my favorite times because there's just so much momentum, and everybody's coming back from holidays and things like that. So if you've been away, welcome back, and if you're new, welcome. If you are looking around the room and you're going, you know, I'm new here and I'm checking this out and I feel a little awkward or anything like that, please don't. It's a new church. We've been around 18 years, but we've planted so many churches out and we've done so many activities and different things like that that every week there are people that come and visit us and come here because we're kind of a little different church. We don't own a building and we don't have a lot of stuff. Although the people that load the trailer would probably differ with me on that. But what we do have, a value, is found in our people. And if you're like myself, life is complicated, isn't it? And a lot of times in life we face a lot of adversity, but we believe and we continue to promote the idea that God loves us and that He does want to be involved in our day-to-day lives. And being so, we get together each week and talk about what that looks like. We brainstorm ideas. We challenge the darker sides of our nature. And we encourage each other to do good things. And we learn what love is. And that's about the best thing you can ask of a church. The idea of lifting Christ up by following His example. So we're talking about neighbors. And this is part of a three-part series called The Third Love. Alicia's going to do a wrap up in the fourth week, but this harkens back to about 10 years ago when I was with our sermon writing team. We were doing a series, and in that series we were doing a series of topics called One More Thing, and we're talking about the kind of middle to later chapters of the book Gospel of John, where he recorded in great detail the things Jesus said immediately before He was crucified. And it was kind of like He had His closest disciples with Him, and He was sharing things with them that were personal and were important. You kind of think if I knew I was going to die, what kind of things would I say? Immediately what you would say would become intricately more important because you want to make sure you say the right things. Well, the things Jesus said in these closing days had enormous significance. And where we're divvying out the topics, I kind of got the last one, and the last one was love one another. And as I was studying love one another, something Jesus said kind of stood out to me. He said it's a new command. And I'm thinking, how could it be a new command? You see, ourselves, like a lot of churches, kind of bought into the fad, the idea of simplifying church back in about 10 or 15 years ago. We thought, let's make church as simple as possible so people can understand. And most churches kind of grabbed onto the idea of grabbing the greatest two commands. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. T-shirt, we done it, and we were kind of promoting that idea. I have since maybe had more of a realization that life's a little more complicated than simplifying things down to a few points. But there is an aspect of truth in what they have to say, because what Jesus kind of portrayed these commands are linchpins that kind of everything else as far as our behavior and knowledge and belief faced on or turned on. So last week I talked about love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. It's on YouTube. We're going to be creating links to our webpage so you can look on our webpage. We have a blog we've done on this topic. So if you want to go to www.kawarthachurch.com, you can follow up a little bit more of the details of what we're doing. This is week 2, and this is love your neighbor. I have to say, learning to love your neighbor is complicated. I'm using that word again. It's complicated. Can I share with you why? When Jesus talked about loving your neighbor in His day and age, most people lived, grew up, married, had families, worked, and died within a kind of a 5-mile radius. People didn't move around. Now, Israel was kind of an exception that way, in that once or twice or 3 times a year, everyone in Israel would endeavor to travel to Jerusalem for the holy festivals. They definitely did it for Passover, and sometimes there was a Feast of Weeks and different things like that. And when they did, they would take their families up. And so to most Jews, the opportunity to love your neighbor only happened on those special days. And so you would bring a little extra something. The homeless and those who were injured and everything loved Jerusalem at that time because everybody coming to town was looking to do something nice for someone. And so a lot of times they received a lot of money and help and care and stuff like that because everybody wanted to love their neighbor. And so they go up to Jerusalem, and for that weekend or those few days, they would get loved on tremendously. And then everybody would go home and everybody felt they'd loved their neighbor, right? Other than that, your neighbor was kind of the same 20 people that lived around you all the time, and your family. And so it wasn't a complicated process because you didn't really have that many people to love. Now, you may meet today more than 1,000 people. And so for me to think, okay, how do I love my neighbor? You say, well, who's your neighbor? Well, we understand that's probably everybody. How can I love that many people? And how can I love them well, right? Doesn't that strike you as a bit challenging? Like, does that mean I have to stop and do something nice for every single person I encounter? Does it mean I've got to look around this room and make sure I touch base with everybody? What does love your neighbor look like in a transitional world? One where we are consistently around other people. Today I'm going to talk about that. And loving your neighbor may be something that surprises you. Most people, when we say the word love in our culture, think of kind of a gooey, mystical, kind of feeling that you have for people. We're very good at being sentimental. Really, the concepts of empathy and sympathy are very elevated in our society. But just because you feel something doesn't mean it's true. A lot of times, I may see somebody in need, and I'll feel really bad for them, and then I'll think, I'm such a loving person. Isn't that great? I've got a big heart. I must be really close to God because I really feel bad for them. And I walk by them and don't do anything, right? That's not love. That's just sentimental, being sentimental. But in our culture, that's what's promoted. But you got to understand a little bit why. Because we have thousands of neighbors, millions of them. And you may, in any given day, encounter 900, 1,000, 1,200 people in your journey. At the coffee shop, the post office, at work, at church, at school, all those kind of things. So what does it mean to love our neighbor? Are we mean it's kind of a sentimental thing, or is it something else? I'll just read you the passage that we're focusing in on today. And this person was a teacher of the law. They were basically the intellectuals of the Jewish world during their day. There was the Pharisees and Sadducees. They had tremendous amount of education, but the teachers of the law were those that really understood the text, the holy text, really well. They often had the Torah memorized, which is no small feat. The Torah is an enormous document. They'd have it memorized word for word, and then sometimes other sections of the Old Testament. If you ever want a good challenge, try memorizing the first 5 books of the Old Testament. I guarantee you it will take you years. And these people often did. And it was their job to interpret these commands, interpret the rules and laws that were presented there. And so one of these teachers of religious law was standing there listening to the debate. Jesus was interacting with some Pharisees and Sadducees, and he realized that Jesus had answered well. So he asked, of all the commandments, which is the most important? Now, this is interesting because it indicates there was some sort of debate about this. Now, dating back, most Jews had considered the first command, love the Lord your God, all your heart, soul, and mind, immediately zeroed in on it that this was a foundational command. This was an important command. And so they called it the Shema. And the idea is that you get up every day and you repeat this every single day. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Okay, hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. And it's also a last rites. If you're about to pass away, often this is the thing you say right before you die. It was just part of Hebrew culture and still is to this day. Jesus replied, the most important commandment is this. Listen, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is the one and only Lord. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandments are greater than these. The teacher of religious law replied, well said, teacher, you've spoken truth by saying that there's only one God and no other, and I know it's important to love him with all my heart and understanding and all my strength, and to love my neighbors myself. This is more important to offer than all the burnt offerings and sacrifices required under the law. Realizing how much the man understood, Jesus said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And after that, no one dared to ask him any more questions. There's actually a couple of encounters Jesus has with teachers of the laws. One of the other ones is a young man that disputes him and basically says, "Who's my neighbor?" And Jesus goes on to tell the account of the Good Samaritan. But this one is interesting. This one is someone that was tracking with Jesus. You see, there was some dispute over the greatest commands. And to most Jews, the first one, well, that was nailed. Love the Lord your God, all heart, soul, and mind. The second, love your neighbor as yourself, was sometimes debated. And it was debated as, is this one of the cornerstone commands? Because the concept of loving your neighbor as yourself was actually tucked at the back end of a number of rules or laws or instructions God gave his people in the Old Testament. It's like almost an afterthought. But many of the Hebrew scholars jumped on this immediately and said, this is a cornerstone command. But there was some debate about this. So this teacher of the law goes to Jesus and says, is this one of the, what are the greatest commands? And Jesus reiterates the importance of these two cornerstone commands. I'll read you the passage, just give you an idea of kind of the context of love the neighbor yourself. It's in Leviticus. Jesus says, do not insult the deaf or cause the blind to stumble. I don't have a slide for this, Craig. I'm just reading it out from here. You must fear your God. I am the Lord. Do not twist justice in legal matters by favoring the poor or being partial to the rich and powerful. Always judge people fairly. Do not spread slanderous gossip among your people. Do not stand idly by when your neighbor's life is threatened. I am the Lord. Do not nurse hatred in your heart for any of your relatives. Confront people directly so that you will not be held guilty of their sin. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against your fellow Israelite, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And then it just continues on with these commands. But Jesus reiterated that the scholars were right in identifying this as one of the cornerstone commands. So what does this mean? What does it mean to love our neighbor, and how can I do this? Well, a couple of things. One is this is a command that's tied into another one. So by that, what I mean is loving your neighbor apart from loving your Lord God with all your heart, soul, and mind is considered impossible. Jesus considered them equally important, which is significant to think about. He's saying, love God passionately with everything you have and love your neighbor as yourself. It is equally important. Listen to Jesus' word, equally important. There's somehow with God this huge connect between our relationship with him and our relationship with other people. Okay? So that's the first thing to note about this. So it's a transitionary, and the two are connected in. The second thing is to ask the question, so what does love look like? What does it mean to love your neighbor? Who is my neighbor? And how do I apply this? Right? So how do these things tie in one with the other? And so what I've done is I've taken a number of passages throughout the New Testament where the love your neighbor is quoted and talk about the things around them, because what I want to do is draw a picture to us about what it means to love your neighbor. If you have questions, hang on to them. I'm going to do a big Q&A after the message. And Alicia, you're still around with the mic? Where's it? Oh, she's teaching. Where is the mic? Is it over here? Okay, Selena, will you do that? That'd be great. Thank you. We'll go around if you have any questions. So just hold your questions, and then we'll do that, okay? The first passage talks about watching how we talk, okay? Loving my neighbor means I watch how I talk, okay? Most people know this command, and most people feel guilty about the way they talk about other people. If you're like me, you often find yourself saying horrible things about people and go, where did that come from? Or some of us really like good gossip, right? Because it's interesting. Did you hear what so-and-so did? You wouldn't believe what they're going through, right? If you're like me, I'm interested. You're immediately connected with that because we're all storytellers, right? And so to hear other people's stories is fascinating. And the problem with gossip is that it's not always true and is designed to push other people down so I feel better about myself. That's one of the greatest calamities of gossip. But it's not just gossip. It's in a positive sense how we talk. How do we lift others up? How do we take the people around us and help elevate them with our talk? James compares the tongue, the fact that we talk, as the most difficult aspect of our personalities to control. He said if you can control what you say and you really get a handle on it, you can control just about anything. Because what we say often comes out, and what we feel like saying often has a negative bent. But God recognizes that what we say also can have a tremendous benefit. We can worship God with what we say. We can promote. We can sing. And that we have the ability to look around other people and recognize things in them and lift them up by how we talk. Here's a verse that's just tied into that. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather serve one another humbly in love. For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping with this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you'll be destroyed by each other. So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you'll not gratify the desires of the flesh. See what I've got underlined? Will you read that with me? If you bite and devour, not hearing you, each other, go to the second one, you will be destroyed by each other. Yeah. How we talk is like a form of warfare. It really is. And in today's day and age, people have a hard enough time connecting with other people. It really is a challenging time because, like I said, we get this kind of overload of so many people around us. And if we're hanging out with someone and they really rip us and we're really angry about it, we can go find another friend, right? And a lot of us have friends that are kind of like skipping the surface. Well, I got 300 friends on Facebook, and I've got this and that and everything like that. But to have a deeply connected friend is a rarity. And the reason I think we struggle with that often, I think, has to do with the lack of restraint in how we talk. Somehow we become sensitive about how others are talking, so we're ultra sensitive. And then when we talk to people, sometimes we can offend them. And then in other aspects, we say things that may not come across properly or actually are deliberately kind of passive aggressive. And we end up isolating each other. And we get to a place where we don't feel like talking to anybody. Because, relationships break down so easy. But if we watch how we talk to each other, we can avoid this warfare. And not only that, how we talk is a powerful tool that can have a powerful effect on other people. The people I remember growing up as a kid that didn't have a dad, was in a big family, didn't get a lot of attention. I always remember those older guys who were on the football team, or I'd encounter in my school, or a teacher, or that. Those men that came alongside me and said, "How you doing, Scott? Yeah, you can do it. I believe in you." All those kind of things. I always remember those people because probably your best memory, the memory that has meant the most to you in your past, is probably when someone took you aside and said they believed in you. And probably your most painful experience that you've ever had has been when someone has said something cutting and hurtful and bitter to you. I can guarantee that almost. Outside of a physical abuse or a sexual abuse, the things people say can have the greatest ability to elevate us and the greatest ability to tear us down. So watch how you talk to each other. Second one, treat people lovingly fair. The love your neighbor command is not a sentimental command. It's actually a very practical command. Okay? As followers of God, in the Jewish text, they were the same way. They recognized that each person was made in the image of God. And because people were made in the image of God, we needed to honor each other. And how do we honor each other? Well, God listed all these commands that kind of drew a picture of what that was like. Now, a lot of people say, it's really harsh, and those laws, we're not under law, we're under grace, and all those kind of things. But they fail to recognize that a lot of times these commands had an underlying spirit to them. And that's why the two commands were such a focus. Because if you love your neighbor, you're probably not going to murder them. If you love your neighbor, you're probably not going to sleep with their spouse. If you love your neighbor, you're probably not going to talk disparagingly about them behind their back. See how that command is a linchpin for a lot of the other commands. And so to love your neighbor really has more to do with you, because it says love your neighbors yourself, and less to do with other people. It applies to other people, but it's an attitude we have from the heart. And so when you're talking to someone, C.S. Lewis talked at length about this. He said, when you're talking to someone, probably if you saw them how they really were, you would be tempted to fall down and worship them. Because human beings made in the image of God have this tremendous ability and tremendous mark that God has put on them. You ever notice there's a lot of self-help and a lot of things, in our culture, they're like, you're the one, you're amazing, you're a winner, you're all those kind of things, and they kind of give us a little thrill, but long term they don't really last long, right? Like you can listen to Tony Robbins in the morning and, he'll make you feel really good, and then you go out and have a flat tire and it's gone, right? It's gone, all those kind of feelings and that. Why? Well, because you weren't designed to talk yourself up all the time. I really don't believe in that. I believe that instead of having self-confidence, we should have God confidence. God confidence is recognizing the God of the universe looks at you and says, I choose you, I love you, and you're precious to me. And then when we face adversity, I got a flat tire, but man, it's not as big as God. I'm feeling down about myself, I'm out of work. But I can tell God about that. God will help me. I can trust him. All these kind of things are tied to that connection to God. And so when I love my neighbor and I'm choosing to love other people, I'm lovingly fair. There's probably two types of people here, and they'll kind of struggle a little different. The ones are the rigid, rules-based people. They're the people that make lists every morning. They're the people that know how to, the policies of their work. They're the people that read instruction manuals. I mean, how sick is that, right? And they're very rule-based. And so when they see other people screw up, they immediately recognize it, right? And they feel a little jolt of moral superiority, because they obey the rules and they don't do that. Okay, for those people I would say, master loving grace. And by that what I mean is see people made in God's image. Don't fluff them over, but give them second chances. Greet everybody anew when you see them. And then the other people are kind of a little more feely, kind of mystical people, and they love everybody. They're kind of walking parties, maybe you're one of them. You thought you saw the people turn in here and you came to join because you saw a bunch of people and thought this was a party and not a church. Those type of people, they just kind of go with things and all those kind of things. I always say to those people that behavior matters. So if you observe someone doing something destructive to someone else, rather than just going along with it, you might need to say the truth in love. You may need to speak up. You may need to say, I'm not doing that with you. Or you may need to say, you're on a path of self-destruction. I'll help you get out of it, but I'm not going to support you to get there, right? And so try to be lovingly fair, or treat people lovingly fair. Third one is this, and that is be creatively generous. Oh, can I go back? I want to do the verse for that. Apologize. And it's, if you really keep the royal law found in Scripture, love your neighbor as yourself, you're doing right. But if you show favoritism, you sin and are convicted by the law as a lawbreakers. James was recognizing that there was disparity in the church that he was writing to. They were treating certain people a certain way and other people they were ignoring. And he called them back to this. Love your neighbor yourself. It means you treat everyone lovingly fair. It's really interesting because everybody looks at the Old Testament and they'll say, it's horrible, there's genocide, there's all these kind of things, and fail to see in the Old Testament just how revolutionary the writing was. If you compare the Old Testament to the writers of Mesopotamia, the old Babylonian, the old Persian, the old documents, the Assyrians especially, man, they were hardcore. Their commands were basically, if you screw up, we'll kill you. Steal something, we'll kill you. Look at your neighbor the wrong way, we'll kill you. Failed to say something to the king, well, we'll kill you for that too. That basically was their law. The Old Testament had all kinds of weird things when you really think in light of the day and age they lived in, which were incredibly loving. And one of them, in that chapter in Leviticus that goes on to read, it said, if you have an alien or someone from outside your culture living among them, treat them as one of your own. care for them, assimilate them, love them, be kind to them. Don't kill them, right? Incredibly revolutionary in that way. And here's the same thing. So the third one, be creatively generous. And let's go right on to the verse here, Craig. Let no debt remain outstanding except for the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be are summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to the neighbor, therefore love is a fulfillment of the law. This is the aspect of this love that I love as well, what the writer calls a debt of love. It's connecting how God treats us to how we treat other people. Christians, we make a lot of noise about this, and it's good because we need to remind ourselves of it, is that we need God. That we're desperately lost without Him. And that need is not like a crutch. I mean, it's practically a stretcher. We need God in our lives. We need God to challenge the darker parts of our nature. We need God to be the people we're meant to be. You know what? It's really easy to try to feel good. It's something else entirely to try to be good. We need God for that. But once we recognize what God has done for us, the gift He's given us, His love and His grace and all those things, the question is, what do I do with this? I remember Tony Campolo talked about, he was on a train with someone, and there's two guys standing there, and then one of them started to have a seizure. And his friend, immediately kneeled down and made sure he was okay, tilted his head the right way, and was trying to make him comfortable. And he apologized to Tony. He said, sorry, he gets this way sometimes. And the seizure finished, and the friend was very shaken up, and he sat down again. He was taking care of him, and Tony Campolo didn't say anything. And the guy said, this is my friend. We were in Vietnam together. There was a time where I got really badly wounded, and this guy picked me up and carried me out and saved my life. And after the war, some of the injuries he suffered has led to this condition where he gets seizures. As soon as I found this out, I moved in with him, and we're friends, and I travel with him to keep his seizures from becoming fatal, because there's all kinds of dangers with the seizures. And Tony Campolo said, you went to live with a guy, you're doing all this? Why would you do that? And the guy said, are you kidding? After what he did for me, this is the least I can do, right? That's kind of the way the gospel works. We look at what Jesus gave us, the gift of His salvation, His love, and we go, well, if He did that for me, what's the least I can do? And so the writers of the New Testament talked about what they called the debt of love. And what this is that as we travel around, as we see people, we look for ways to better them. Can I give you a couple suggestions on that, and then we'll start the Q&A? First one, remember what people are passionate about. Remember what people are passionate about. I've gone through different phases, the different passions I have. I have all kinds of things. I'm a kind of a hobby horse and that. But it's really interesting because it seems like whatever hobby I'm in, Dave Laux always recognizes it. And at Christmas or my birthday, he always shows up with a gift that's something special and unique about that hobby. Something that I go, holy smokes, how did you know? Because Dave is like that. He's like a walking encyclopedia about people's passions and likes. And you know what? I want to be a little bit like that. Where do people work? What are their names? What do they get excited about? What things get your blood moving, Like when I see Mitch, asking her about her film production, right? She just loves that. Craig, Transformers, just stuff we're all passionate about, stuff that we're experts in, right? Because we all have passions. Quentin, it's Star Trek, right? By the way, Picard, he's coming back on, eh? You heard that? How old is he? He's a 90? Yeah, I know. Man, that's crazy. The geriatric Star Trek. Anyways, I digress. What are people passionate about? That's one aspect to it. And then look at ways you can add value to people. And it may be through a gift. It may be through picking them up a coffee. It may be finding a book that they've been looking for. It may be seeing them in church sitting by themselves and Plant yourself beside them. Say, hey, I'm Bob. Who are you? Getting to know them. Look for ways to lift those around you. You know what? There's so many critics. We all have so many critics in our world. And a lot of us, it makes us feel this small. You know what's rare? Are people that come up to us and say, how you doing? How can I encourage you and lift you up today? That's all I got to say about that. So, does anybody have any questions? Questions or comments? I'm going to sip on my coffee and listen. Mike, where are you? Oh, Trish, over here. Perfect.
Thinking about neighbors and ones that are the farthest away in other countries, that we see on UNICEF and, Save the Children and all of those programs.
Yeah.
And we go through what you were describing as sentiment.
Yeah.
And feel really badly about it and see it and oh, that's terrible, and then shut the TV off and walk away. It's easy to see, and my family was more like, treat the ones around you closest the best, and extend that as much as you can. But to go farther than that, that's a real stretch. That's harder, I think, because where does it end?
Yeah.
And there's so much need everywhere,
it's true.
What do you do? So
that's true.
How would you suggest loving your neighbor in that way?
That's a great question.
Small donation to every one of them, or what?
How do you spread yourself? Love all of them inadequately at the same time, right? It's really funny because I remember talking to one pastor in their church, and he was a good guy. He had a large church, and so what they gave to every organization, they gave him like $50. So they could say, oh yeah, we support these guys, or we support this missionary, because he said if they didn't, there was someone in his congregation who were going to freak out. Right? And so basically they supported everybody $50 or $100, and they had, like dozens of missions partners, and didn't kind of focus it in on one or two or three and make their bullets count. How can I do that as an individual? For one thing, great idea, sponsor a child. Okay, that's just a great idea. I've been on the front line of those programs. I've traveled World Vision, and Tony Campolo said, when we stand before our Savior in heaven, it's probably a good idea to have one of those kids standing next to you. That's kind of cool. But we have a little guy named Darwin and Honduran child, because I spent a lot of time in Honduras, and he's in his teenage years, and he's kicking his soccer ball around. He's a great kid, and that's always an encouraging thing to do. But also too, and I want to talk positively. There's a lot of good stuff going on in our world right now, and one of the things that I suggest to you at some point in your life is go on a mission trip. Go to one of these places, because a lot of times it's easier for me to be generous or to really focus on something if I have some faces to kind of connect to it. TV is so impersonal. It really is. Look for something, adopt a country. You may say, South Africa, that's my country. And learn about it, study about it. This is why we have the Big World Weeks. We have 4 of them this year. Last week we were talking, or a couple of weeks ago we had Tony here. We're talking about the Coburg area and the people that came to Christ in his camp and all those kind of things. And when I go down to Coburg, you can't shut Tony up about Coburg. He's like me with Peterborough. I just know Peterborough. I know it really well. I study it. I'm a student of Peterborough. Well, it's Coburg and the surrounding areas. He won't shut up about it. It's kind of annoying, actually, but he's very passionate about it. So put some legs to that, adopt a country, and if you get a chance to ever go on a missions trip, 2-3 weeks, they're life-changing. They really are. And sometimes in a heart-wrenching way. That's a fantastic thing to do. Pick something small you can do. But I would say it's better to adopt one agency or one thing and give generously to it than it is to try and spread it around to everybody. Recognize your part in the world. And can I just say, right now in our world, there are fabulous things going on. Like, there really is some headway in a lot of this stuff. The average standard of living in this world has gone up tremendously. Clean water in Africa, you even talked 10, 15 years ago, it was horrible. And now there's all kinds of things. There's one guy I met at a conference, and he designed a pump, because that was the expensive thing. Getting clean water, you got to get down in the ground. And he had a friend who was an engineer, and he talked to him about how do we do this. He said, I need something that costs less than $100. This guy was an engineer. He went back and he designed something that cost, I think it was $22. And it gives them the ability to somehow get down on the ground and get clean water up, and these things they're mobile and all that. There's so many cool things going on in our world. So it's encouraging to see what God is doing internationally for the poor and a lot of those things. But you're right, the need is so great. But look what you can do. I have a sponsored child. I give through my church. I also, there's different places in the world that jump out to me. The sex trade. Another one. That's a horrible thing that's going on in our world, slavery and the sex trade. And there's some great organizations that are doing some tremendous things, sponsoring people out of slavery and giving them education. And I was talking to Noel Hutchison, who's one of our missions partners, about what they've done in Cambodia. There was one city 20 years ago, they go to that city and it was the streets were lined with children, some of as young as 2, 3, 4 years old, all part of the sex trade. And what's the name of the organization? Fails me. International Justice Mission really started working on that community, that city, and you can drive down the streets, and it's still there a little bit, but the streets have been cleaned up because they worked with the authorities and the government and organizations and that, and rescued these children and those kind of things. So it's a dark world, but there's some good things happening. God's on the move. I always say that, God is moving. People say, where'd he go? Kate. Oh, Craig, yeah.
Sorry. Hello? Is this thing on? I wanted to add to your watch how to talk. And something that they didn't have to worry about back then is nowadays it's watch what you type.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a huge issue with social media is it's so easy to read something that you disagree with or just a difference of opinion. Michelle and I have talked about this a lot lately with everyone could just have their own opinion online, which is fine. Yeah. But everyone also gets so offended so easily and they just start blasting people. Yeah. And before you know it, and I've done it, and everyone I think has done it, you just have said something that you just wish you could take back, or you say so much more and so much more negative stuff online when there's that anonymity, when you don't have that kind of repercussion. Yeah,
you're not dealing face to face. You're not
face to face with someone, so you're almost more bold, you're more vicious. Yeah. And it's so hard. And the second part of that is watch what you read, because online you can read so many negative comments and stuff, and it's so hard to get into a loving frame of mind after reading so much crap online. And it's huge.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of wisdom in that, Craig. Thank you. There was someone over here. Ashley? Oh,
no, me
Kate
first. Me first.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all about you, Kate.
It is, totally. I have a very busy life these days. I've got a toddler. I've got an international student staying with us. I work. I'm starting my own business. All that great stuff.
Yeah.
But I was.
And you got to pray for me. That's
definitely a lot of time right there. Yeah. So I was talking to my husband, Scott, the other day, and I was just telling him, I want to start volunteering because that really makes me happy, is helping others. Yeah. And of course, we're looking at our schedules, and we're like, so how about 3 a.m. on a Tuesday? That's kind of what we had. Yeah. And I've just been praying a lot lately that God just brings something for me to do, show me what people need. And I have to say, my mother has definitely taught this to me, to see people and see needs. Yeah. And I do thank her so much for that. But God has just been showing me that I work in a field that I work in a physio office. So I'm seeing people who are usually cranky because they're in pain.
Yes.
And God's just saying, pray for them. Yeah. That's how we show to be a neighbor. I pray for them. Yes. I actually show interest in them other than their disability or something like that. Yep. Sometimes I have a client right now whose husband is palliative. Yeah. And she's just so tired of it all. Yeah. So I went to my wallet and I gave her $5 for coffee. That's all I could think of, right? Yeah. But when we do see the things on TV or in the newspaper and things like that, there's sometimes we look at our wallets and we're like, I can't afford to give to all these people because there's just so much in the world that does need help. Yeah. But love our neighbor doesn't mean love the neighbor by giving them cash or a present or something like that. What we all need is a kind word, a prayer, a smile to someone who's homeless on the street. That they see that they're a human. You know, pray for those children in another country. Pray over your child's daycare kids. You know, that's how we show to be a neighbor. I had another client who, for Christmas, I sent him a Christmas card. And a month later, he comes in and he was bawling when he came to see me. He said, I was actually going to commit suicide. And I felt like no one saw me. And it was just a kind gesture. I was just like, this guy's alone. I'm going to, you know, write him a funny. I actually sent him one that you probably would send to somebody.
One of the sick ones?
Yeah, one of the sick ones. And I was just like, ooh. But it's just, it's so easy to get so wrapped up in the world of how horrible things are and things like that. Or, oh, it's cold today, which I think it's gorgeous outside. But, you know, it's just try to have some positivity and love our neighbors by praying, a hug, a smile. It doesn't have to be cash.
That's
the
good.
end.
That's good. Ashley? Good comment, Kate. Chocolate helps too.
Finally. No.
And carrot cake.
So when you were talking about confidence, like build yourself up, like from God.
It's not the mic, it's the speakers.
Chirping
at you.
I'm a visual person, so like in my head, I immediately pictured like arrows. So like if I'm like standing, I can picture like an arrow of like not false, but not very deep, like confidence coming like at you, but not really penetrating into you. But then with God, I can picture him like reaching down and like putting confidence in you, and like even the feeling of that, like the God confidence feels more like relaxed and more like
peace, right?
Peace versus the, you know, And also with everything that's going on in the world and all that, how do you cope with, I know we're not supposed to like fit into the world and stuff like that, like be a part and stuff, but how do you like fit in enough to fit? Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
you know, to every complicated question, there's a totally wrong, simple answer. But I would say this is, as followers of Christ, don't focus on being obnoxious. Focus on being different in a good way, right? You know, how you talk. I mean, that's a huge one. I mean, if you're someone that lifts other people up and talks positively about them and refuses to gossip, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. And a person that types that way or posts that way. Can I say something else too, and just throw this in, and then I'll actually, can we get the baskets going around? There's outies and innies. Outies are the ones you take stuff out of. The innies are the ones you put stuff in. If you want to pay by plastic, we have a machine now at the back, and so just talk to Selena after the service, and feel free to give that way. Thank you. If you're our guest here today, don't worry about giving to our church. We want to be a blessing to you today. If you choose to become, you know, one of us and hang out here a little more, by all means, worship through giving is part of it too. Be generous. But one thing you can do is fill in a response card. We're going to be assembling a new contact list. I'm starting to miss some birthdays and anniversaries and those kind of things, so I want to follow up on that and make sure that you get your sick Christmas card. By the way, if you're new with us and you've never got one of my Christmas cards, I'm just going to apologize right from the get-go. I actually have a lady in the mall who sets aside the sickest, darkest Christmas cards for me, because she heard about this pastor that sends out these sick cards, and I'm sorry, it's just, look at it as me loving you in a very creative way. Okay? That's great. Yeah, can I just say, and we're going to have a quote show in a second, and the worship team will come up, but sometimes loving your neighbor can be a big thing too. Somebody out there someday is going to stand up for people with gambling addictions, right? Some people are. Somebody somewhere in our culture needs to stand up for student indebtedness. You know, a lot of times students are coming into university and colleges, and they are encouraged. Money's thrown at them that a lot of times they can't handle, or money's thrown at them for programs that aren't going to produce jobs, to support these, these huge, and I know I'm in a community college and that, but these huge administrations, and a lot of times these college, and a lot of those kids in their 30s and 40s aren't going to be able to start their life because they pay such huge student loans. And you may say, well, it's their fault or this, and you know what? We all need education, and in today's day and world, we need it especially. But, somebody's going to stand up and say, look, if you're going to loan them this much money, then something needs to be done. I'm a bit of a soapbox. I know there's two ends and it's a complicated question and everything like that, but there's something wrong when we're saddling our kids with so much debt that they end up putting off life for 15, 20, 30 years because they can't afford to have a house or a place to live or to get married or have kids and stuff like that. That is a societal ill. Credit card companies, they're charging 21, 22, 23% when prime is at like 1%. Why did they get away with that? Well, there's all kinds of things and money and all that kind of thing. But there's a lot of people out there don't have a lot of restraint, rack up their credit cards, and some of us are among them. And credit is just given to somebody's got to stand up and have a voice for those people and stand up against that injustice. There's all kinds of things. And maybe you're the person here today who is going to be the one that challenges that. So loving your neighbor has all kinds of daily applications. We encourage you to start with that way. Start simple. But maybe there's someone here who's going to be the person to start that fight. And maybe there's someone already in culture you can attach yourself to that's doing it. But yeah. All right. So I have a quote show, and then we're going to close in a song. Thank you. I love the interaction, the Q&A and stuff like that. It's very stimulating, and you guys have great ways to add to things. So thank you for that.